Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the XR Market Opportunities and Gaps webinar being run by VRX from London. I would very much like to welcome our three panelists and our expert moderator for today's session. So we have Angelo Del-Priore from HP Tech Ventures, Maddie Callander from Boost VC, and Stephanie Llamas from SuperData. Who've all got some great insights to share with you today. Our moderator for the session is Amy Peck, founder and CEO of Endeavor VR, who's a good friend of VRX, and all the participants will be involved as speakers in our VRX 2018 event coming up in San Francisco on December 6th and 7th. We'll send you more info with the recordings after the session. So over to you, Amy. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Pete, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And very excited to chat with our stellar panel today. So let's just dive right in. Angelo, because you're the only one I haven't met, I'd love to start with you. I'd love to really just hear a little bit more about specifically what you work on at HP Ventures, what type of investments you make, what your sweet spot is, and then we'll give both Maddie and Stephanie a chance to do the same.
Sure thing, thanks. So I'm a partner at HP Tech Ventures, and a couple of the areas I cover are VR and AR, and we write $1 to $5 million plus check sizes in companies that are of strategic interest to HP. And our overall strategy is to move from, being this great hardware provider, but also providing some of the value-added services and softwares and other things to help us differentiate and capture more of the customer's needs. And we don't disclose particularly what the investments and that we've made in, but you can look at our website and just kind of talk to people and figure out the direction we're heading in is more towards that software and ISV and SI side of things. So that's us in a nutshell, and I'm more focused on the commercial side of the business than the consumer side.
Great. And then Maddie, on the Boost VC side, can you share a little bit about some of the work you're doing and the way that you're looking at startups and the investment opportunity?
Sure. So Boost VC, we are a pre-seed fund and accelerator focused on making science fiction a reality, sci-fi a reality. One of the big verticals that we've really focused on has been VR and AR. We've invested in about 70 companies in the space and are at the very earliest stage of investment. We're writing checks anywhere from 25 to 150K into those companies and really building out the ecosystem of how do we help virtual reality and augmented reality, X reality startups build out a community, build out an ecosystem, find talent, work together to learn quicker and be able to get to market faster and build great products. Our next accelerator program where applications are open now, but we are going to have our Tribe 12 in February next year. So that's where we're at.
Excellent. Well, I have certainly met some fantastic companies that have gone through Boost VCs, and you guys do really a spectacular job of buoying these young companies. And then from the other perspective, Stephanie, you have really a lot of experience kind of looking at the landscape in general. So I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on, when you're gathering your sort of data and you're analyzing the landscape, what are some of the opportunities? What are some of the companies that are getting it right out there?
Sure, yeah. So a little background on me and the experience you're talking about. I work for SuperData, a market research firm that focuses on data analytics and consumer insights. And so a lot of what we've been seeing over the past few years is, a slow start to XR, but definitely the sense of not if, but when. And so where we have been seeing opportunities and growth has largely, it started out, I think, in the usual suspects. So on the consumer side, we're looking at games. And where I see that being a major point of opportunity is that you have these really tech savvy, first movers that are going into the space and able to leave the space as evangelists. But on the other side, we're seeing location-based VR really also take off and give the opportunity for those users who are not quite as first mover in the tech space, giving them the ability to experience XR and kind of coming to them as opposed to calling them to VR and AR. And then mobile AR has seen a lot of growth, and we anticipate quite a bit of growth. So on that end, we're seeing, for this year, about $2 billion at the end of the year. And, once Pokemon Go kind of hit that point where it was true AR, we started to measure that as being a revenue driver. And that's a big part of where that revenue is coming from. But we're seeing a lot of interesting applications and growth opportunities in mobile AR that will increase that market to about $5.4 billion by the end of next year. And then it'll surpass VR by the end of 2021. And what's so great and valuable about mobile AR is giving that sense of virtuality or the ability to kind of dip your toes into XR and understand it from a perspective that's really, that people get from their mobile phones, having access to AR at all times. So we see that as a great point for VR to push forward as consumers are starting to crave a little bit extra. The same way, I think, games has been a great example for XR in the traditional sense, in that mobile games have been such a great entry point for a lot of general consumers, and that's actually pushed them into the PC and console spaces. So where we do see a lot of value is coming from that mobile AR side, and then helping to boost VR on a consumer level.
That's great. So let's kind of continue on the mobile AR line, because it's kind of the gateway drug, and it's going where the people are. So Maddie's, with some of the companies that have come through Boost VC, have you seen a lot of AR companies? Are you sticking mostly to VR? And then again, where those opportunities are, and as you're shepherding some of these companies and advising them, where are those opportunities on both either the AR front or the VR front?
So we are focused. We've been really heavily focused on virtual reality, and so I don't have a ton of background or a ton to talk about on like what we've invested in the mobile AR space. But the thing that I've seen that's really unique to the virtual reality companies that mobile AR brings to the table is this window into the virtual world. So what can we create? What can we do to be able to bring people externally into the virtual spaces that are being created? When we think about like enterprise software and this trend towards Web XR being a platform for everyone to be able to jump in a meeting together virtually. That means that some people are going to be on a mobile phone, some people are going to have a headset, some people are going to have a full Vive, setup or Oculus setup. And so having that mobile VR component where you can start to get the window into the world, I think is going to be a really unique way to start pulling in larger amounts of people into these virtual spaces. We've seen it with a couple of companies where you can interact with people in virtual reality and participate in their experience using your phone as a window into their world. So I think that is kind of a piece of the puzzle that is going to allow people to start seeing the value in the virtual spaces and pulling them in sooner. And then also with even Pokemon Go as like a mobile AR example, that drew a ton of attention, and it was so easy to use and so easy to kind of have everyone start to see the value of both geo-located experiences and then filtering fun IP over our world and overlaying that experience. So I think all of this is all pushing the entire industry forward. Both virtual VR, like immersive VR, and kind of real world overlays. So it's a really exciting time to be seeing, and I hadn't heard that statistic that Stephanie just said. So I was super excited to hear that the mobile AR market is moving into this very big direction in the next 5 years.
Yeah, yeah, and then Angelo, on the on the enterprise side, and I think that sort of cross platform functionality that both Stephanie and Maddie are alluding to is a key proponent of kind of pushing the technology forward. How with the investment that, as much as you can share, of course, that HP is making, how much are you thinking about that, sort of building that cross-functional capability across some of your strategic investments?
Oh, I think it's critical. I think, as Stephanie said, it's not a question of if, it's really just a question of when. This is going to be the next generation of compute, much like mobile was. What I'm finding is helpful for some startups, given the installed base on AR devices outside of mobile phones is still so small, like with the Metas and the Johns, et cetera, is startups that are kind of starting with a, see what I see for simulation or training or maintenance repairs, starting with the phone and the tablet, but then kind of naturally progressing slowly, like Reflect is, and doing things with AR, headsets that are more kind of high powered and really able to do a lot more, and also enable people to be hands-free, which is really important for me on the commercial side. And then also if you're dealing more interacting with people in meetings or, let's say in a retail environment or a hotel, being less obtrusive, because people will get freaked out, right, with the Google, even with something as small as the Google Glass. So having that kind of overall strategy and progressing with the market, I think, is critical for startups.
Great. And again, still on HP, one of the questions that, basically every investment panel gets is, when you're out there sifting through these companies and potential investments, what are the most important qualities that you look for in a company?
So given the market is smaller than we had all hoped it would have been, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, I'm looking particularly on the commercial side, that someone has a really specific target customer that they're going after. And it could be something super unsexy, like elevator repair, but that they're actually developing a tool that's going to have an ROI for those customers that they're trying to solve for. And, we've seen this with surgeons, we've seen this with pilots, but we've also seen it now, thanks to Walmart with store managers. So clearly the value add can be from someone who's paid $15 an hour to someone who's paid, $150,000 or $300,000 an hour and dealing with, $20 million pieces of equipment. So solve a specific problem, ideally one that you're intimately familiar with in the industry that you or your head of sales has come from, so that the pain points, the workflows that you have to fit into and all the objections, because we've got to get from beyond kind of the lighthouse clients, which we're starting to see the startups get now, whether it's Jaguar, Audi, or L'Oreal, whoever, and kind of moving that into production and moving it beyond just kind of, tech for tech's sake, hey, this is cool marketing buzz, to hey, we're going to move that budget from the innovation person, the marketing person, and now we're going to actually move it into somebody's P&L. So some GM is going to sink their money into utilizing this technology on a daily basis and wouldn't imagine not doing it, in a few years.
Mm-hmm. And then how important is the pedigree of the founders? Is there sort of, I know there's no hard and fast formula, but, typically investors say, we're really betting on a team. What are some of the qualities that you look for in a team?
So pedigree by school, not so important, right? That's just a filter, but not by any means a perfect filter. I'm looking for someone who's smart, intellectually curious, extremely passionate, but financially, personally irrational, right? Just because the life of a startup doesn't make any sense from an economic perspective. So I wanted to see someone who's just, poured their life into solving this problem. I was just talking to someone I was advising the other day, and he was just on the fly. I was asking him 6, 7, 8 questions, and he's able to kind of go back and forth, do the math in his head, because he's already thought about all these problems and thought about all the different perspectives and how he can solve his customers' problems and where he's going to play in the value chain and the customers. So I want to see someone who they've got to know 5 times as much about the market, 10 times as much about the market as I do, and have already thought about all these problems before I kind of give them my $1 million. Because unless they've committed to this and poured all their energy into it, it's not something that they're going to stick with because, there's going to be so many ups and downs to it.
Mm-hmm. And then, Maddie, again, you have a different kind of process where people are actually applying. Can you share some of the things that whether it's specific or just overarching, that you've seen in some of the applications where it immediately kind of bubbles that team up to the top of the list?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so at the stage that we're looking at these companies, usually there aren't super metrics that they have. The product maybe isn't launched completely, or it's in beta. They don't have the traction, they don't have the financials to be able to really prove out a model that makes any sense yet because their customer isn't paying. So a lot of what we look at is really the team and the team dynamics and the background of the team, as well as why they want to solve this problem. To Angelo's point, that passion that they have around solving this and the curiosity that they have around solving it, I think is one of the number one things that we look for is how curious are they really about this problem? How passionate are they about this problem? And that they're not doing it for the technology's sake. VR is super cool. AR is super cool. It's very enticing. It's very enticing and it's very alluring to want to start a company using virtual reality and augmented reality. But really, the tools, they're just tools. They're just like, an Excel sheet or a email. Like, it's a tool set that we now have access to and a technology that we now have access to solve problems with. And so the problem has to come first. And so that curiosity around solving that problem, I would rather invest in a company that thinks VR is the right way to solve the problem today, and then have them learn that it's not, but they still want to go solve that problem. And maybe it'll be AR or XR of some mixed reality of some sort, or maybe it won't be VR at all. And that was how their first stab at trying to solve this problem because they thought it was the right way to do it. But it really is about putting that problem first and knowing that, having the conversations with the customer, really understanding the specific reasons that the problem exists and how to solve it, and not trying to be everything for everyone. I think a lot of the companies that we see at the earliest stage are trying to solve all of the problems for everyone in different markets and really getting very, very specific about a use case and a customer.
I think all of
Can
those
I add
are
on
such...
to that for a second?
Oh, yes, of course. Please do.
Sorry, Amy. I think a lot of times startups are afraid to also charge their customers, right? And it's just like, stop. You're adding value to your customer. So giving it to them for free is a very different level of commitment than getting someone to even spend $10,000, because then they're going to finance, or they're talking to the boss, or they've got skin in the game with you. So I've been in sales positions. I know that's the first lever you always want to pull is, give it away for free or give it at a discount. But like, you've got to kind of establish, like, this is value. You're doing them a favor, right? You're helping them, right? You letting them use your product for free, you're just enabling them to string you along a little bit or not make the commitment. So you've got to just be disciplined and believe in your product. Think about how many hours you and your team have put into it. And say, like, yes, like, you're the lighthouse client and I'm giving you a discount, but it's still going to cost you, $8,000 a month or whatever it is. Right? There can be a short trial period, but you've got to get people to kind of commit to you. Otherwise, you think VCs are bad. Enterprise managers also want to do things for free or put up a decision. So kind of force them to move along and kind of manage your sales funnel, particularly at that bottom where you've got all these interested people.
I think that was such a great piece of advice. So Stephanie, again, you have a bird's eye view, but you also have a lot of data to really back this up. We always talk about where the traction is, and we know all the great kind of slam dunk use cases, but are you seeing any holes in what's out there, and that where there's clearly a market need, but there's just not quite an obvious solution yet?
That is a really good question. I think the biggest market need right now is sort of indirect, and it's really marketing and awareness. And so the big players, I wish that we saw a little bit more marketing and evangelism amongst consumers, you know, especially around the accessible resources that are affordable, you know. So luckily, you know, I think we've started to see Oculus really pull forward and lean into the Go. Hopefully we see even more of that with the Quest, because no matter what there is on the consumer software side, we can't, you know, it doesn't really matter if consumers aren't experiencing VR through headsets. And so where I think, you know, it's not so much that there isn't enough value being added to the market. You know, there's certainly on a software side, whether it's games or, you know, even an overabundance sometimes in terms of solutions. But we just need that affordability, and we need that plug and play sort of aspect for the hardware. So until we kind of get to that point, it's really hard to see where those gaps might be on the demand side, because there has to be that demand to begin with.
Yeah, that was a great point. And we actually did get a question come in from one of the registrants saying, you know, there's all these new studios now, and they have, you know, a lot of them have sort of pivoted out of games and have said, oh, you know, enterprise is the new frontier. And really what that's a euphemism for is enterprise has all the money. So we're gonna you know, now start building solutions for enterprise. But now there's just this sort of plethora of companies globally, you know, who are all going after the same very small piece of pie. And the question was, and I'm going to throw this out to any one of you who has an answer, you know, what's the best strategy for them to sort of separate themselves from the pack?
I think I don't have an answer. I have an opinion. Sorry. Go ahead, Stephanie.
No, please.
No, I think you've got to prove your efficacy. And I think it's fantastic now that we're getting more and more studies, right? Because this wasn't really mass adoptable or mass available until a couple of years ago. But now you're starting to see, like, oh, surgeons can save X percentage of time in the operating room if they practice, you know, putting in a new tibia or repairing your tibia for you, or a pilot, or like every place. So proving that you've got efficacy, and going back to my earlier point about ROI, if you're able to provide someone a strong argument about why you're going to save them money or decrease customer churn or whatever their objectives are, that is going to be your best calling card. And on the consumer side, right, it's VR is right now just a game, right? But wait, it can be used for pain management, right? And as people start to get aware of that, and having some data to kind of prove your point, it's such an enabling technology with applications in so many different places. And it's just building up the credibility and getting people who were not aware of it. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in Silicon Valley with a bunch of mostly lawyers. And I was like, wow, less than 5% of people here have actually tried like a tethered HMD. And this was in, I don't know, this is in Menlo Park or Palo Alto. So we can kind of forget how small the population is that's actually had an experience this still.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Stephanie, did you have some advice on that as well?
Yeah. So this kind of goes into a different direction, but one thing is also, you know, understanding where the demand is, particularly on the, you know, in terms of the enterprise side. So we find that in terms of supply of solutions, there's an over-indexing compared to the demand for certain sectors. So for instance, there are quite a few firms that are supplying solutions in the retail AR space, right? But the demand is not quite high enough to serve all of those suppliers. And so where you then find a lot of demand and not enough supply are things that are highly technical and highly specialized. And so it can be really, really difficult to break into, let's say, medical or, engineering. But going for what's most obvious means that you're going to be you're going to be trying to swim in a very full pool. And so, understanding, we on our side have data that shows, certain sectors are really hungry for solutions, and they just are very difficult to resolve. But if there is a way for a company to go into one of those less service sectors, like I said, such as engineering, such as training, such as healthcare and medicine, then you really are going to be able to stand out because you're offering a commodity.
And I have to echo what, Angelo mentioned earlier, is that, pick some of the unsexy sectors. Everyone wants to be in the shiny spotlight, but there are a lot of companies out there, sort of industrial companies, that have a number of problems. And there are some great ways to address some of those issues using both AR and VR. And then Maddie, kind of going back to, these early stage companies, and, you have such great experience, with the programs that you're running at Boost VC. Have you had an example of a company kind of like you mentioned, kind of coming in with a particular idea and a brief, and then just completely say, you know what, this isn't going to work, and shift gears, and then, within that, I think it's your program is at 12 weeks that, they were actually successfully able to kind of change direction and sort of coalesce a strategy before leaving the program. I'd love to hear any stories you have around that.
Yeah. So we have, we definitely have seen companies kind of come in with this like idea of who they think their customer is. And usually the thing that happens is when we really sit down and have a conversation, okay, who is your customer? What is he or she thinking about when they're not at work? Like, really, let's get into the nitty gritty of that customer, who that customer is. It comes out very, very quickly that they haven't talked to enough customers. And the moment they go out and start talking to the customers, they're like, oh, that thing that I wanted to create, that actually isn't the product they want. And I find that piece of this puzzle to be the most valuable. And kind of circling back to that last question around these studios, I think studios have this idea of what they think who their customers are and what they want. And going out and actually having that conversation with a bunch of different people, and then coming back with a more narrow focus of what they can provide in a really unique direction, I think would be an incredible, valuable piece for them to be able to narrow their niche of how they can add value with XR, VR, AR to these enterprise companies. But yeah, so we've had a couple of examples. We had, not in the VR space, but we had a company currently called Storyline, but it's in the voice space, and they came in as a restaurant automation company, and they ended up in the Alexa, working in an Alexa kind of Squarespace for Alexa, building out very quick apps. And it really is really interesting to hear their customer stories and how much that changes things.
That's great. I love to hear those. And so in terms of, some of the companies that you've seen, let's talk about some of again, back to the wow factor. If you can give maybe a couple of specific examples, and Maddie, we can start with you, of just companies who just really came in with a great idea and really solved a great problem. Because I think it'd be helpful for this audience, who I know a lot of startups are with us today, and love to share some of those great examples.
Yeah, so there are a couple of companies that come to mind. One recent company that we invest in is called Apex Officer, and they're doing virtual reality training for police. And it was a company that is a very unsexy, it's kind of an unsexy market. It's not necessarily, as you were talking about earlier, not a super exciting, glamorous space to be in, but their background and their experience with their family and the police force, and really seeing how police are trained, and then realizing that they're already paying, there's already, Angelo was saying earlier, moving out of an innovation budget and into the P&L of the company. There's already a huge budget for digital training for police and military and first responders, and then really being able to be able to not have to experiment in the innovation budget side and actually being able to provide a valuable solution to actually replacing their existing training that they have on the P&L with a updated, much more immersive version of it. We also have a couple companies working in the collaborative environments where you're either looking at virtual models, being able to bring in CAD or designs for very expensive products that you're going to be building or manufacturing. Dimension 10, based out of Norway, is allowing you to come together in a virtual environment and have these conversations around what do we need to do about this design before we actually put it into production? What are the conversations that need to be had? And let's physically be in the same room with the 3D model. So starting to drop the travel budget, being able to have more immersive conversations around the visualization of that thing before you've actually gone out and put all the money into the actual manufacturing of it. Couple of examples.
And then Angelo, I don't know how much you can share. So if you can share specific examples, that's great. But if not, what would you like to see? What are some of the solutions you'd like to see?
I'll talk about companies that we haven't invested in, but I'm familiar with, like Apex Officer. Love that company. I met them at Boost VC a few months ago. And like the uncle was a police officer, and just he or they just know their industry backwards and forwards and have really thought about the problems that they're trying to solve. In the healthcare space, another company, also VR, the guy's a surgeon, right? So he's done this surgery 100 times, and he's like, this is silly. And, now he's enabling people to kind of get trained. And again, just really solving the problem that people have. In the LBE space, a space that, I'm like, it's $1 a minute. This is expensive. But then you have some companies like Exit VR, Exit Reality, San Francisco based, and it's just like a nuts and bolts business, right? Like he's taking out the operator, he's sticking it in different places. So being smart about how you're attacking the market and not just doing tech for tech's sake. And I've been in the Silicon Valley for almost 20 years, right? If you develop a product and then look for the market, you're kind of in trouble. So going back to what Maddie said ahead of time, right? Talk to the customers, know what their problems are, and just kind of focus on meeting their needs in a profitable fashion. And then your business will kind of grow from there. There is a lot of competing tech out there, right? So you've really got to, knowing your customer and how to operate efficiently can help really differentiate yourself.
So I'm glad you mentioned Exit Reality. I know them well, great company, and there's a number of other different versions of LBE companies. Mm-hmm. How important is LBE right now? I mean, I know certainly HP. We all of us work fairly closely with the LBE side of HP, but on your end, on the investment end, how important is LBE to the overall kind of enterprise landscape?
I think it's different, right? I think it's more focused on the consumer. There can clearly be applications where you could have corporate events at an LBE space, or you can do education and training at an LBE space, like during the day. But I consider, most of their money is going to be coming from consumers, on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, birthday parties, etc. So right. Not so much on the enterprise space. I think it's like a secondary use case. And there is going to be some stuff. But, I'm not going to go into nomadic, right? Like we know there's this training, let's say, for first responders, like multiple people, right? But I think that's different than what you're saying by LBE, or no?
Well, no, I'm thinking more just in sort of socializing VR, because one of the challenges that enterprises have is that they especially in deploying something, a solution broadly across the workforce, one of the big issues is that there's just not a fluency with the technology, and they have a workforce that can have run the gamut in terms of their familiarity and comfort with technology. And so the hope is that both mobile AR and LBE is one way of sort of socializing VR and sort of helping people kind of understand the vernacular of being in a 3D environment. So I guess I'm looking at sort of more the bigger picture.
I would love it if everyone could get to go to the see the void or the 5 remaining IMAXs or Servios and really understand kind of what they're going to be able to get out of it. But, most of those locations are kind of, I think last time I saw data was like half of those locations are in Asia, and even those locations, there aren't that many of them. So the throughput. So I think it's a great first experience for someone versus, let's say, a Daydream or Google Cardboard, just because of the motion sickness and the field of view. So I would love it if everyone can do that. I don't know if it's going to be the best way for us to kind of get people, or that's not going to hit the most number of people. I think people will get used to it more through their mobile devices and kind of get a sense of like, oh, this is what AR is, and then you can kind of take them over to VR and say, okay, it's slightly different, but it's a different spectrum of the spectrum.
Yeah, and again, I think because you mentioned that you're really focusing on sort of a broader picture and strategic partners. How how are you looking at some of the 5G technologies and sort of how looking at networks and ISP and CDNs and is there an opportunity within HP to partner and develop further solutions around being able to kind of push that these massive amounts of content out?
I think it's a huge opportunity, but it's already frustrating enough because you're waiting for your software update and your thing to crash. So if you start now trying to do something in a network, or who hasn't set up a booth at a trade show and then been like, the network's down, right? So I already don't put on my headset at home because it's going to, I'm going to have to fiddle with it. And, and I'm too impatient to wait the 3 minutes for my update to happen, right? Or it's going to crash. So definite long-term potential, if going back to the when, not the if, but I think it's going to be more just kind of mobile-based. And since we're more of a PC tethered, like we're looking at investments in that space to kind of go beyond PC, but it's not something we're looking at partnerships right now on.
And then Maddie, are you seeing companies?
Can I add something?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So the one thing that I was just going to talk about, when you're pitching VR to a customer, or you're pitching your product that is going to be in VR to a customer, an enterprise customer, I think one of the things that we've seen kind of over and over again with our companies pitching different enterprise or larger corporate customers is you have to really kind of lead them up to the VR experience. And you also have to really think about the entire workflow of how that customer is going to be using your product in their day-to-day operations, and not just that you created this great immersive experience and it's not a one-time, like you're in the headset and then you're done. Like, what's the onboarding? Like, what's the lead up to it? What does the product look like before you actually get into VR? There are a lot of hurdles we are facing in that space with the kind of restrictions of the different platforms, or what does that feel like? But I think one thing that really hasn't been a huge, I think needs more attention from a product perspective is the onboarding process every time you want me to get into VR, and what does that look like leading up to it in a work environment. If I know I have a VR meeting, or I'm going to need VR for an upcoming tool editing software, like if I'm going to be going into VR for a very specific piece of my time, what is the 30 minutes before? Am I getting reminders the day before? What are the kind of onboarding and offboarding experiences around the product itself? And that also goes into how you pitch it to enterprise companies. I've seen companies come pitch us where they're like, hey, just jump in the headset. And I don't get any sense of like where the value is going to be, or what if it's going to be saving me time or money, or kind of really leading me into the story of how this product is going to be adding value to my everyday workflow. And I basically want it to add value in that pitch itself too. Take me down the narrative of why this is important for me. Pique me with the savings or the cost analysis or the potential opportunity, and then like gently enter me into the VR experience versus kind of throwing a headset on someone and saying like, here's a demo. So that's just a little piece of advice that I just think we could all work on improving.
I think that's great. And then what about WebXR? Where do you think that sort of falls in the landscape?
Is that me?
Sure.
Okay. So I think WebXR is a super exciting piece of this because there's a lot of potential for the companies to be building in WebXR and then being able to use a high-end headset and then also bring in the mobile headsets or the Daydream or the Oculus Go, and be able to just get people into VR more. Right now, I mean, one of the biggest hurdles that's stopping the XR growth is headsets, right? And getting people in to see and be able to access. I think mobile XR is a big piece of just getting them to know the virtual worlds exist. And if you build on a web XR framework, you are building cross-platform. It's basically, in my mind, you're building across the platform. You're going to be able to have the high-end headsets do really well on it, and you're also going to be able to pull in maybe a window into the world on a phone. So I think that's a distribution opportunity to be building on WebXR. But I would love to hear other people's opinions too.
Yeah, and either as well. Let's go with Angelo, and then Stephanie. We haven't heard from you in a little bit.
I agree with everything she just said. So I don't have too much to add in terms of, I think it's a great, platform and can kind of easily get you across multiple devices, right? Whether it's high or low end. So I think it's a great enabling technology, and, I'm hoping developers take off on it.
And then, there's so much hype around Magic Leap, just sort of moving over into the AR glasses world. And then North's Focals, there was just an announcement that I think they raised, I think it was something like 140 million. How do you see the evolution of AR glasses in this landscape? I know you mentioned Reflect a little bit earlier, Aether, with remote technical assistance. Vuzix has a lot of great solutions for warehouse and pick and pack. I'd love to hear any other solutions that any of you have seen. And Angelo, maybe we can start with you on enterprise using AR wearables.
I think it's just the usual suspects, and you've mentioned half of them. And I think we're going to go to, towards a Google Glass or something just transparent that, A, gets you hands-free, and B, gets you an unobtrusive kind of view working with someone. We've all gotten used to working with, or having someone pick up a phone and whatnot, but it'll be a little bit different if the phone's kind of pointed at you through the glasses or whatnot. So not too much to add beyond, the companies you've already mentioned, but I think that's the natural progression of where the market's going to go, just because you're going to be adding so much value, whether it's just in so many different applications, consumer to retail, enterprise, SMB, first responder, et cetera.
And Stephanie, I know that you just recently released a new report. What were some of the relevant stats around kind of the AR wearable market?
Yeah, so one of the things that we saw, or that we see, is that AR, I think most people recognize AR and MR headsets are going to take a lot longer to penetrate, at least on the consumer side. So we see the market being about 5.6 billion by the end of 2021. And if you compare that to mobile AR, for instance, mobile AR would be 3 times that, at least on the consumer side. So, we see it as something that could be really interesting for LBE in the short term. But as far as like consumer penetration, we're looking at a much longer tail. But in the XR space, we see quite a bit of value coming in, and there just are so many applications. One thing that we talk about is that you don't want to just build, and Angelo and Maddie have said this, and I 100% agree that like you don't want to just build it and then hope they will come. You want to find the opportunity in the market and then satisfy that opportunity. And there are so many opportunities in the market that are trying to be filled by VR that really would be much more valuable with AR, MR. So there is quite a bit of interest and investment. And when we look at investment, on the R&D side, AR, MR is actually much more, we're seeing a lot more investment on that side. So about 6 billion at the end of this year versus 5.1 for VR on the enterprise R&D. Because it really is something that we're seeing more and more of a value from, particularly in training and healthcare medicine. So enterprise is really going to be the space where AR/MR headsets are going to proliferate in the short term. And I would say on the consumer side, I mean, we're really looking at about 7 to 10 years before this is something that would be accessible in the way that we're seeing VR in the next few years.
Mm-hmm. And then are you seeing any differences in both adoption, but also in the types of solutions that are coming out, in whether it's Asia and Europe versus America? What are some of the differences that you saw in the last round of data for this most recent report, Stephanie?
On a regional level?
Well, really on a global level, but by sort of market, because we're always comparing ourselves to both Asia, but I'm here in Europe now, and there's really a burgeoning market here, incredible landscape of startups. Are you seeing any kind of marked differences in where the market's going and what the market sizes are?
We see the market size being shockingly, I would say, comparable on the side, on the east versus west side. So, Asia is definitely a place where we're seeing a lot of concentration of solutions and investment, and just even government support. But there still is just a lot of innovation in the West, in Europe, and in North America that's making them both competitive markets with Asia as well. So, I think that there's quite a bit of excitement around Asia and their endeavors on all levels of XR. But there really is a lot of dedication on the side of North America and Europe, and a lot of even smaller markets that are looking at these solutions, where there is technology and sort of a base that can be built on in a different way than in Asia. And I think on the consumer level, Asia pulls ahead, but on in terms of their ability to invest, and in terms of just their the amount of innovation that can come out of there versus on the North America and Europe side. But in terms of enterprise, we do see comparable markets.
Mm-hmm. And Angelo, are you investing primarily in U.S.-based companies, or only in U.S.-based companies, or globally?
We're looking globally. The majority of our investments so far have been U.S.-based, but we've also looked outside and made investments in other markets as well. Mm-hmm. So there's good things happening all over the world. So there's no lack of technological skills.
Indeed. So to kind of wrap a little bit up, I'd love to get each of you, your top 3 tips for companies in the space, whether they're established and really looking for just that bigger market share, and then the next round of investment. And we've talked about a lot of them, but if each of you can sort of distill down the main criteria and things that you think would be really valuable to share, especially with startups in this space. And Angelo, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I'm going to be repeating myself, unfortunately. Solve a real problem for a specific target market, and also make sure you're fitting into that workflow, because no one's going to revamp their complex workflow around a small startup solution, because you're likely to not be in business, or they may switch providers. So you've really got to minimize the work that your customers, and I'm biased to the enterprise side here, the work that your customers are going to have to do. Be happy that they're paying you some money, and then make it as seamless and bug-free as possible. A little bit like what Stephanie was saying beforehand, in terms of kind of that, what's that out of that box experience? If someone, how's an engineer, how's the designer, how's the person going into a meeting going to kind of step into your solution and step out kind of easily? Because if there's friction, people are just not going to use your solution, and then you're not going to get renewed, or you're not going to get cross-sold or upsold, et cetera.
Great. And Maddie, what about you?
I second all of Angelo's advice. And But I would also in that ease of onboarding a customer, you know, a lot of issues come up with hardware and how do I package the hardware if they don't have the headsets already. And I just so encourage teams to figure out how to bundle it in so it's a part of the package that you're selling. I wouldn't make tons of partnerships and things right now. I would go out of your way, do the work for them to make that first user experience in VR if it's their first time bringing hardware into their business, like VR hardware into their business. Go out above and beyond to make that just work well the first time. So that would be one piece. Also think about your distribution, how you are getting in front of the audience that niche customer that you're trying to get in front of. There's not a lot of really great distribution channels right now. So I think there's a lot of creativity and a lot of possibility for having a unique distribution of how you get the word out. By word of mouth is something that I think, you know, in the tech space we kind of forget about, but it's one of the most valuable ways of communicating and in getting people, you know, that referral based like word of mouth system is really valuable in any industry. And then the final piece is don't forget that like VR is magical. Even if you're building an enterprise app, I still want to go do something that I couldn't have done before. And whether it's AR or VR, don't forget to add that piece of magic into your product because VR really makes you feel like you're a superhero. It makes you feel like you can do something you physically couldn't do before. Like, you know, even in an oil pipeline or something like that, you could move them around or do, you know, you have these superpowers that can solve problems in the virtual space to be able to then realize it in real life. So I think magic is a really important piece of VR.
I love that.
Can I have one shameless plug?
Oh, yes, please do.
A shameless plug. So I've been with HP for 5 years, and I love the fact that it's forward-looking enough. But with, I think, to my knowledge, the only major OEM, we have our own separate VR business unit. So it's gotten, since we've done this 7-8 months ago, it's gotten so much easier because there's one VP in charge, and he's investing money, and he's hired up all these people. And I think people have noticed that HP is really stepping up its game, whether it's in LBE or in training or in simulation or first responder. There are more feet in the street, and it's made my job boring because now I'm just a bean counter because everyone is out there talking with all these startups and getting basically igniting all these partnerships, small and large to be announced, that I'm just really excited about. And so just if you have a cool solution, you know, come find me, please.
Yes, and share with us how does one get on your radar, Angelo?
Send me an email. That's, you know, here's why I am a good partner or investment for HP. Sometimes people come to me with, you know, agricultural or, you know, cow management systems. I'm like, stop, I'm with HP. So send me an email. It's Angelo, ANGELO @hp.com, and I will take a look.
Great. You have all given such great advice, and Stephanie, I'm going to let you finish up with your 3 pointers from, you know, you've got that global standpoint that you would share with some of these companies.
Yeah, so going last, a lot of the things I would suggest have been mentioned. I think those were really, really great answers. And the biggest things, you know, is we talked a lot about enterprise. I think that's a good thing. So consumer, you're going to be up against quite a few companies who are already either established in the space or getting some really big funding. You know, if you're not already a first mover in that space, unless it's something that you sort of have legacy experience with, you know, if you're a game publisher who has been publishing games for quite a long time and looking at the market and understanding it from a games perspective, unless that's the case, really try to find where there is monetizable value, because where you're seeing profit margins is not in consumer, it is in enterprise. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is understand if, you know, VR or AR or MR, what is your actual solution? Who are you going after? And just because you think maybe VR is super cool and you want to do VR, is that where your client or potential client base is? Is that the right solution for them? It's not about the interests that companies have in cool solutions. It's about what the client is looking for and what they're going to want. So I think keeping an eye on that, and I of course come from a place where market research is something that I'm very passionate about, but it really is super important. Understanding it's word of mouth is a really great way to start if you're a startup that can't really afford market research, or you're not sure how to access it. In markets like in Silicon Valley, there are a lot of really great pieces of advice coming out of there from experienced companies and from folks like Angelo and Maddie, who can tell you what markets are being underserved or where there really needs to be innovation. But also looking at the numbers and understanding how those numbers are calculated, what's the methodology, vetting those numbers, where are they coming from, all of those sorts of things. Don't just take data at face value, but definitely seek it out and really dig into it.
Well, I think all of you gave such great insights and advice today, and I really appreciate all your time and energy today. And I think I'm going to end before I pass it back to Pete by repeating Maddie's statement that I think is the soundbite of the session, which is VR really is magical. And with that, I hope that we all get to see all of you listening at the VRX conference in San Francisco. And I'm going to hand it back to Pete, who can give you some more details on that. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thank you to all the panelists. I thought there were some great insights shared there, and I thank you all very much for your time and everyone who stayed on the line. As Amy mentioned, this webinar was produced in conjunction with the VRX event coming up in December. I think what you've heard today is there are so many opportunities in the market. It's quite hard to see the wood for the trees sometimes. So many different technology avenues, so many different applications, so many different audiences. The real purpose of the VRX event in San Francisco is to bring together the leaders from across enterprise, across entertainment, across tech, across all sides of the community. And we'll send you more details of the event when we send out the recordings from this webinar, which will hopefully be tomorrow at some stage. So look out for an email from me. Anyway, thanks so much for your time. Have great mornings, afternoons, evenings, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you soon. Thanks very much.